And that's why the House has acted to make sure that we are dealing with the fiscal cliff, to make sure that we're not making it more difficult in this country to succeed.
Absolutely. And just, again, by virtue of a comparison, with the President's proposed tax hike, deficits would still total $6.6 trillion over the next 10 years, according to his own budget. But by comparison, our budget, the House Republican budget, would reduce deficits compared to his by $3.3 trillion, while lowering taxes on small businesses and spurring economic growth. That's the difference. That's the difference.
Well, and I think the key is actually, as you mentioned, spurring economic growth. And we can talk about what happens to our economy with this policy or this legislation, but the bottom line is we've got to address that debt and deficit, and only economic growth, long-term economic growth, is going to help us address our debt and deficit situation. But a high debt and deficit make it impossible for long-term economic growth. And so you've kind of got a circular problem here that, for whatever reason, the United States Senate, the President, hasn't taken seriously. And just talk a little bit about the summer of recovery that was supposedly going to occur a couple of years ago after $1 trillion was spent on the stimulus, money that went to companies like Solyndra that went bankrupt, and the United States taxpayers are going to be out over $500 million because they'll never get repaid. You've got the stimulus bill that was supposed to lead to the summer of recovery, and yet here we are with 43 straight months of unemployment at or above 8%. 43 straight months of unemployment at or above 8%. Now, the American people know that even that number is not right, because they know that maybe they've got a job that is only part-time, or maybe they're working full-time, but it's certainly not at the level that they know is to their full potential. Or certainly does it makes it more difficult for them to meet the needs of their families. And so that 8.3% number doesn't even count the people who've given up looking for work. Doesn't even count the number of people who are underemployed. And so the fiscal cliff, you've got millions and millions of Americans out there knowing what this Congress refuses to do, and that is, if Congress will act to adopt these jobs bills that we've passed over to the Senate, if Congress will adopt the House budget that actually puts this country on a road and path to growing the economy, to preserving and protecting the promises that we have made to future generations, that number is going to come back down. It's not going to be 8.3, 8.1%. It's going to be lower. Millions of people will be back at work because of the bills and legislation that this body has passed, most with bipartisan support.
You know, to use the President's words again, because these are direct quotes, so let's look at a couple things. Last April, President Obama said, quote, "We have to live within our means, we have to reduce our deficit, and we have to get back on a path that will allow us to pay down our debt." That was the President just last April. But also, I want to make sure that there's no misunderstanding. This is the President's own words in February of 2009. I'm pledging to cut the deficit by half by the end of my first term in office. And I know we're kind of circling back to how we began this hour tonight. But since the President has taken office, our national debt has increased by $5.3 trillion. $5.3 trillion. And
$5.3 trillion now, I think there's a statistic out there that shows that that's more money than the amounts of money spent by, or the deficits between George Washington and Bill Clinton combined. Or maybe if it's George H.W. Bush. The fact is, we've never seen a period in our nation's history where unemployment has been matched by a failure to recognize the needs of the American people, where debts are allowed to skyrocket, where you can say on TV one thing, pledge to the American people that you'll cut the deficit in half, and then the next thing you know, it's up by $5 trillion. And maybe the question isn't, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago, but maybe the question ought to be, are you better off today than you were $5.3 trillion ago? Well, your son can attest to that, because he's 10 months old and already owes his share is, what, $51,000 right.
At 10 months old. So, and, you know, we both have young children, and this is why we're here. we're here for them because we want this country to be as great for your children and mine and all Americans' children and grandchildren and generations to come. And quite frankly, it is horrendous that we would leave this situation on their backs. We keep hearing about balancing the budget on the backs of the middle class. How about spending massive amounts of taxpayer dollars on the backs of my children and my children's children? This is where the future of this country is dependent. And if we don't get serious about this, now, why wait? Why are we waiting till November? Why is the leadership in the Senate waiting till after the election to take on problems that are serious now? As you said before, the clock keeps ticking up. The debt keeps accumulating between now and November. It's not like the $16 trillion is just some arbitrary number. I mean, it's a huge number, but it doesn't stand still. It's going to continue to increase, as I explained when I'm in town halls about the debt ceiling. You know, the debt ceiling is like calling your credit card company and saying to your credit card company, I need you to increase my credit limit because I don't have any cash to pay you the interest on what I already owe, on the debt I already owe. That's where we are. And that's on the back of Margaret and George and your children and all of those other children and grandchildren of Americans. And it's just, it really, as you can tell, as a mom, it makes me upset, and that's why we're here. But a couple of things that Republicans in the House majority, we've taken action. We've taken action on a number of things that have already been mentioned tonight, but we've repealed the government takeover of health care. Ride down the road in any district in this country and talk to a small business owner about that, and you will find out very quickly that they're either going to be close to being out of business or they're going to go out of business completely if this law is fully enacted. We have stopped massive tax increases here in this House that one independent analysis said could destroy more than 700,000 jobs. You highlighted that earlier. We have replaced these indiscriminate spending cuts of sequestration with common sense solutions by calling on, again, our friends in the Senate through budget reconciliation. It's hard to do that if you don't have a budget, but through budget reconciliation, through common sense cuts instead of just across the board, and rein in this wasteful government spending, and with the 30-plus bills that you and I have highlighted, some portion thereof in this discussion tonight that are sitting collecting dust in the Senate. All 30 of these jobs are job-creating, energy-producing bills that are sitting in the Senate collecting dust.
Yeah, and I think you talk about the bills, the regulations that we've passed. You talk about the things that we have done to avoid the fiscal cliff, the things that we have done to avoid sequestration. And there's a word that has been missing that we haven't used tonight, leadership. It takes leadership to address these issues, and that's what we have provided through so many of these bills that we have talked about. Leadership to make sure that hundreds of thousands of small businesses don't have their taxes increased. Leadership to make sure that farmers and ranchers can continue their operations without worrying about a death tax that will prevent them from passing on their land to the next generation. Leadership to make sure that the sequestration is carried forward. Yes, we reduce spending, but we do so in a more responsible fashion. A way to make sure that we don't jeopardize the ability of our men and women in uniform to defend their country and to protect themselves. And I want to talk a little bit about the issue of sequestration, because that's something that we haven't met. And the issue of leadership, once again, crops up. It just keeps coming forward where the House has led, and we hear crickets from the other side of town. And the American people, I don't know if they were following what happened to the White House just this past Friday. Last week, the White House announced that it will miss the legal deadline for delivering a report to Congress on the spending cuts from sequestration that will take effect in January. Now, we hear a lot of complaints about, well, the Congress hasn't done this, the Congress hasn't done that. But here's a law that says you've got a deadline to present your ideas for leadership to the American people. And I guess it must have been too tough, because they're not going to comply with that. They didn't comply with that.
Well, and you'll see, again, further action from leadership here in the House on that, calling on the President to outline exactly what this is going to look like. And like you said, he hasn't. And it's just one more on the list of uncertainties for job creators. I see our colleague and our friend, the gentleman from Kansas, has joined us, and certainly feel free to jump in here and
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity. And just like my colleagues, spending a little time in the real world, some call it a recess. For many of us, it was time to go back home. And I admit in this job, and I'm going to admit that, I'd much rather not be here and be at home. But what I heard at home is many of the same things that my colleagues are saying tonight. Washington, can you get your act together? And in this chamber, we passed many, many things that would hopefully improve the economy. But one thing that seems to be on the mind with my colleagues is pretty clear. Times have changed. I know some of my folks, our colleagues, have been here a while, and they think that perhaps in the White House, it's the same old, same old. But when we hit the $16 trillion mark for debt, $16 trillion, that raised another red flag. Another red flag about what's going on in Washington. And really, I am a Republican. My colleagues tonight here are Republicans as well. And it's not we're not going to say it's a Democrat problem. We're not going to say it's a Republican problem. At the end of the day, it is a Washington problem. It's the fact we can't get our act together here in Washington. We can vote in here to free up job creators. We can vote in here to roll back regulations. But at the end of the day, we have $16 trillion of debt, and like my colleagues, I have young children. I have 4 young kids, and each one of them, they've done nothing wrong yet. Well, they do a few things wrong. I catch them every day at that. But through no fault of their own, they've got $50,000 they're going to owe. They're going to owe on some spending that's already happened before my freshman colleagues and I arrived at this place. $15,000, and it's growing every day. Under this president, trillion-dollar deficits have become the new norm. The last year of the previous administration, $452 billion of deficit in 1 year. I mean, you could have actually. I think the president, then senator, was bemoaning the fact of what a dastardly amount that was. And here we are, have doubled and tripled that amount in each year for the last 4 years, added over $5 trillion of debt. That adds up. My constituents always keep saying, well, I can't quite understand what's a million, billion, and trillion, and it's pretty hard to explain to them, but they don't understand a billion. But for the last 3.5 years, this president, this town, Washington, has added $3.5 billion of borrowing every single day. 3.5 years for $3.5 billion, and that's unsustainable. And they want us to solve this problem. But again, when folks like us gathered here see and hear the concerns of Americans that we have a spending problem, it's not a revenue problem. If it was a revenue problem, we simply would let off the gas pedal a little bit on regulations, and we take care of that. Everybody knows that. Every job creator comes to me and says, Tim, I'd like to invest more. I was visiting with a businessman, owns a packaging company, American Packaging in Hutchinson, Kansas. He said, Tim, I employ 43 employees, and by the way, he did build it. I employ 43 folks, and my father-in-law bought this business in 1987, and there were 5 people employed here. And you know what, Tim? Here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to hire 2 more people. And here in Washington, 2 more people doesn't add up to anything. But for 2 families in Hutchinson, Kansas, it would mean the difference between paying for their college tuition for their kids, whether or not they were able to update their used car, whether they'd be able to make their mortgage and down payment on their house, or whether they might even actually go on a vacation. That's the difference here. And today we have 23 million Americans, just like the 2 in Hutchinson, that don't have a job or are looking for more work. And Tony at American Packaging says this. He said, just give me some certainty. Tell me what the rules are going to be, whether it's the tax uncertainty happens at the end of the year. I'm sure it's been described here. If nothing changes, if Washington doesn't get its act together, if the president doesn't step up to the plate and help us, we're going to have the single largest tax increase in American history, and I dare say in the world's history. Will happen at the end of the year if we don't get help from the administration, if the Senate Democrats are not willing to provide for certainty on taxes. In addition, we have the regulatory uncertainty that's been discussed. We have the health care uncertainty. The provisions of Obamacare are rolling in. Small businesses like Tony do not know, well, what do we have to cover? I don't want to hire 2 more people because I might be fined if I can't provide for them. It's that type of uncertainty that says, you know what, I can invest, I'd like to make some money, and the businesses are there not just to create jobs, they're actually there to make a profit for the owners and to perform a service for the public. They're not here to work for Washington. But that's actually what does happen if you let the free market and free enterprise system work. I had a video where Tony spoke, and I must say what shamed me the most was a response from our local newspaper that was actually, I believe, fronting for this administration, because Tony talked about the fact that him and his father-in-law built this business. And the newspaper said, no, you didn't build that business. Government played a key role in making that happen. You know, the government wasn't there with his father-in-law when he hired employee 6, employee 7, employee 8. They weren't there. They didn't take the risk. Now we have this whole town wants to take credit, including this president, every time someone hires a new person. But they don't take credit or don't take fault for the fact millions of Americans have quit looking for work in the Obama economy. And it won't be perfect under any president. It never is. Washington can't dictate how the economy ebbs and flows. What I trust in, though, is the American people and American businessmen like Tony that say, hey, I would like to invest, Tim. Just give me the certainty to do so and I'll hire 2 more folks. It doesn't mean anything, again, in Washington, but it means something in the real world. And so I appreciate my colleagues being here. And one of the things that the newspaper did mention, actually it was a taxpayer-funded college professor, did indicate as well. He said, you know, just want to let you know that the free enterprise system is a charade. And of course, I guess if you work for a public university, free enterprise might be a charade. But this is the type of thought that invades, I think, many in the White House, and certainly invades where this gentleman teaches. But the fact is, free enterprise is not a charade. What it is about is individuals taking risk, making decisions free from me, free from you, Corey, free from Martha's demands, free to make and take those risks. And that's how the economy will continue to grow. That's how we built the best economy in the world. And that's the economy that's being threatened with a $16 trillion of debt. And again, this is not our problem. It's not their problem. It's America's problem to solve this. And I think we're making progress in the House, and we'll continue to move forward. So that's a little bit what I've heard in my district about their concerns about where we're going to head and where we need to head. And I have had town hall after town hall, about 140 town halls. And usually about every town hall, someone comes up to me and says, Tim, I'm doing pretty well. And my district actually is doing fairly well, despite a massive drought, and which impacts into Colorado as well. And we could talk about water all night, but we probably better not. We're friends right now, just kidding. But they come up to me and says, Tim, you know, I think I'm going to do fine. I'm ready for retirement. The guy's 62, told me this the last time. He said, but I'm worried about what kind of America I hand on to my children and grandchildren. And this current state of affairs is $16 trillion. He said, I'm ready to do what it takes. I'm ready to keep working a little bit longer, do a little more, make a little more sacrifices, a little more investments, because I want a better country than I was given, because my parents gave me a better country than they have, and my grandparents did the same. And that's the type of promise. That's why I get optimistic. That's why I like to go home, because that's what you guys here at home as well as I do, because they're optimistic, they're hopeful about the future, despite what's going on here in Washington, D.C.
Well, the gentleman from Kansas and I share we share the border, eastern Colorado, western Kansas. And so many of the challenges that my farmers are facing, your farmers are facing. You're right, we won't get into water tonight. We'll save that for another day, another time. But the fact is we can both use more of it.
Absolutely.
And the way we can use more of it is we store more water. And yet we have policies that are keeping us from storing more water, adding yet to the uncertainty of our farmers and ranchers who desperately need it. And so whether it's the tax increases that we see at the end of this year, if nothing is done, the estate tax, the income tax rates, capital gains rates. I mean, and you mentioned that this isn't just a big tax increase. This isn't just a large one for the United States. This is the largest we've ever seen, not only in the United States, but around the globe.
You know, 55% death tax. I mean, that's the one that hits the heart of my small business men and women. And they're trying to hand on their business to their children or their grandchildren or someone else they choose, and government's going to come in and grab up to 55% of that estate. And that impacts farmers and ranchers in particular, and many other small businesses. The very heart of economic recoveries in this country have always been driven by small business. It isn't the folks that hire 1,000 people at a time. It's the ones that add one person or take a part-time person to full-time. And that's what I'm here to home. And they're frustrated, but they're ready to roll up their sleeves and go to work, and they expect Congress and Washington to do the same.
And you mentioned optimism for the country, and I carry the same optimism too, because the people that we work for believe that this continues to be the greatest nation on the face of this earth. That if we have Congress, if we have Washington that's actually getting its job done, that will pass the regulations to make it easier to do business, to repeal the regulations in this country, to make it easier to do business, to make sure that we don't increase taxes to hurt their small businesses. Better days are still ahead of us.
Oh, tremendous days are ahead of us. They just say, hey, just stop doing a little what you're doing. You know, heck, I'll even admit it. Some of them say, you know what's there right now, as much as I don't like it, if you just keep it that same. 2 years, give us a breather. Give us a moratorium. We'd like to roll them back. But give us a moratorium, some certainty on taxes, on regulations, on health care. And, Tim, we'll take care of your revenue problems. We'll do it for you.
The only thing that we all can agree on is that the only thing that is certain is that uncertainty. And, you know, to hear the consistency in all of our experiences back home, it's astounding to me why we cannot, why the President and the leadership in the Senate cannot see this. Because if they're really listening to the same Americans that you and I are listening to, they would hear the same message that we've brought to the floor tonight. Mr. Speaker, the choice for the President and the Senate is very, very clear. It's either political paralysis that leads to certain economic catastrophe or bipartisan leadership that puts us on a path towards prosperity. And I would just ask that they keep in mind a few people. Remember who this economy has hit the hardest. You've heard stories tonight in this hour of those business owners that have said just that. Remember the moms at the grocery store that are trying to put food on the table for their family or gas in the car to get to their one or maybe two jobs. Remember the young people, the recent graduates that we've talked about that can't find a job. And half of them in the class of 2012 are unemployed and they're drowning in debt. All of these groups, they deserve leadership out of Washington, not lip service. And with that, Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I yield back.
Does the gentlelady also have a motion?
I move to adjourn.
Questions on the motion to adjourn? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning for our debate.
The House returned today after a month-long break. Members worked on 11